Guys, so here we are with Tim. So Tim, I've worked with you for about 7 years now.
Yeah.
How long have you been in Saudi Arabia for?
Getting on for 21 years now.
21 years?
Yes. First at the King Faisal Air Academy, as it was then called, where I taught the air cadets, the pilot cadets. And then after 10 years, I moved to PSU, where I'm teaching the young, aspiring, up-and-coming Saudi gentlemen.
And where did you start your career? Where did you start teaching?
The first country I taught in was Portugal, way back in 1984. Originally I planned to go to Greece, but then discovered that I didn't have the right paperwork, so I relocated and went to Portugal. First of all, I went to Lisbon to look for work, and then took the train to Oporto, which turned out to be the best place I've ever been, I think.
And Portugal in 1984, what was that like?
What was 1984? What was it like? I mean, I think my original plan was to go somewhere near to my home, so that if there was any, if anything went wrong, I could go back quickly. A 2-hour flight, rather than go to sort of, deepest Africa or something like that. So the idea originally was to be, able to return if I needed to. But Portugal turned out to be a great place to spend my 20s.
And then after Portugal, where did you head then?
After Portugal, I think after 2 or 3 years, I needed to make money, and so I applied to schools in Italy, and I ended up going to Imola, near Bologna, to a small sort of provincial school, and I was lucky enough to be able to make money, because I didn't have to pay for accommodation there, which is 50% of your living costs in Italy.
Yeah.
It was a great year, Italy. It really was.
Italy, and what were you doing in Italy? Were you teaching English?
I taught young adults and children, of all things, which was a tremendous experience, but certainly one I wouldn't want to repeat.
And if I remember correctly, Tim, you're a qualified biologist. You studied biology at university,
That's correct,
right?
Yes. Yeah, my degree, my bachelor's degree was in biology originally, and that proved very useful when I more recently, obviously much more recently, I worked in Kuwait at the Faculty of Medicine English Language Centre, and the biology came in extremely useful in that position for the medical school.
So great. So you started off in Portugal and then Italy, and then where did you go?
Spain, Madrid.
After Spain, Madrid.
Yeah,
wow,
the third job I had in English language teaching was in Madrid, and I worked in Stanton School, both in Madrid and then later the following year in London. In Madrid, that was a really interesting year, because one of my favourite projects was teaching the young executives at Telefonica. I worked in a tower block which overlooks the Bernabeu Stadium, where Real Madrid play.
Oh, wow.
You could only see half of the stadium because it was, the shade, but occasionally we were able to see action from the matches. So that was one thing I have particular memories of in Spain. The other was going out to a place called Getafe, which also plays in the Spanish League. And I used to take the train out from Madrid out into the provinces, and I taught there for a while. So many different projects, so many different contracts, different types of student, every level up to Cambridge proficiency.
Teaching English is one of those jobs that really does get you anywhere, right?
You get tremendous action, really. It's an incredibly dynamic thing to do.
It is, yeah.
But you need some luck as well. I mean, it's incredible to think that I've been doing this for the better part of 40 years. And I'm still doing it. But I don't call myself an English language teacher anymore. I'm a lecturer.
Okay.
And I don't do what we call tap dancing anymore, pointing and, getting them in pairs and in groups and all that. I don't really do that on a day-by-day basis. I do it once a year when they come to evaluate us, of course. But no, I'm a university lecturer today, and I'm very happy with that. Universities are different from institutes like Berlitz and other such places. They are hierarchical.
Yeah.
Very hierarchical.
Very much so.
Everything whether you can even speak to somebody depends on who they are. The hierarchy is one of the big things. But this is just something that, I came across it first of all in the British Council, in Yemen and in Indonesia. The cameraman is having trouble here. But this is the thing. Hierarchy is one of the things you have to get used to in this field, and of course we are not exactly at the top of that hierarchy, I have to say.
So let's recap. So you started off in Portugal, then Italy, then Spain. Where did you go next?
I went back to London, and I had 2 years in London, a year in Bayswater at Stanton School, which was a culturally amazing experience because the students were virtually all from Latin America, particularly places like Colombia and Venezuela and such other Central American countries. And these students were working in Piccadilly, in the food outlets and so on. So they needed very sort of practical, face-to-face, hands-on English to deal with their jobs. And also one of the things I do remember doing is helping them with the ministry that approves them. I gave them counselling about what the rules are, how many hours they had to study English and so on, and make sure that they didn't fall victim to deportation and things like that.
Okay.
So that was a colourful year, and then I moved from there to International House in Piccadilly. In fact, it was Yarmouth Place where the executive department was, just behind the famous 106, which no longer is, the one that's opposite Buckingham Palace and Green Park. That was it was fascinating stuff, teaching Japanese and Swiss students, very wealthy students, small groups of 6 with a video camera, and that was one of the most enjoyable years, I think, for me. And there were all sorts of other things going on in my life at the same time, which meant that the following year I ended up going to Cyprus, which was my first full-time university position at a place called Emu in Famagusta, north of the Green Line in Cyprus, in the Turkish sector. And the Turkish, I was really impressed by the Turkish people and their and an interesting side story to this, I think, is this thing about the island, the Turkish and the Greek communities in Cyprus.
Yes, yeah.
Are fighting one another, but in London,
Yeah.
when you meet them in London, Turkish Cypriots, Greek Cypriots, it's a love-in. They all support the same soccer teams and go to the same parties and mix with the cosmopolitan community in London. London for me was a huge challenge, teaching-wise, professionally. It was tough.
Why was that?
Because you had very diverse groups of students, and really challenging, sometimes very volatile personalities, and they were in conflict sometimes. And I was 30, and I just qualified, and I just got to the point where, I was working in a school where grammar was everything. You had to feed them the grammar and make sure that they got a grasp of it and so on. And there were teachers there that were much better at it than I was, but I learned an enormous amount. Of course, teaching grammar is kind of boring, really. I mean, it doesn't really sustain your interest, except unless you're that kind of, person with that kind of bent. And I've met so many great grammar teachers over the years. I would say I'm more of a diverse teacher. I'm not someone who's a specialist in one particular area of the language. But I'm more of a lecturer today, certainly, than a TEFL teacher. I don't consider myself a TEFL teacher today, even though I have to be validated every year, and prove that I can do the tap dancing. But it's been an incredible life. I mean, basically, I've had 3 areas of focus. The first area was Europe, where I worked in Portugal, Italy, and Spain, and then the UK. And then I ventured off to Cyprus, which is my first university post. Ended up going back to the UK when Saddam was going to send his rockets to the British Air Base nearby. So I relocated via Turkey back to the UK. My next position was in the Netherlands, which was high-level banking and investment managers and such like. I admire the Dutch tremendously. I want to say this, I want to say a plug for Dutch people, the most impressive English language speakers in the world. Not just English language speakers, but multiple language speakers.
I find that
when
a
you
lot.
catch a flight at Schiphol Airport, they have English, they have the airline's language, they have the destination, wherever it is you're going. Oh, they speak the language of that destination country.
Yeah.
They're just amazing people and absolute workaholics. But they also, my biggest, I think certainly my favourite individual, of course, is Vincent van Gogh. Who, in my opinion, is the greatest artist in the world. If you look at his output in his very, very short life, and the quality of those paintings, I mean, what an amazing man. And so for me, he's my hero culturally, I think. And I always look for his paintings wherever I go somewhere. I go to look for Vincent van Gogh's artwork. So, yeah, I mean, linguistically, the Dutch have it, absolutely. I don't think there's a country that can quite. Switzerland comes close, but even in Switzerland, I think they're married very much either to German or the Hochdeutsch, German or French, and a little bit of Italian in the south. But the Dutch can speak virtually any language you care to name. And I think, being British, I should be ashamed of myself, really. I've been here 20 years and I don't really speak any Arabic, but I understand everything they're talking about. But Arabic is completely the reverse, the opposite of English. The script goes from right to left and so on.
They've got some unique sounds to the
Can
alphabet.
I put in a plug for a mate of mine who I used to work with some years ago, who has disappeared now and I don't know where he is. I won't name him, but what I will say is he really impressed me. When I first came to Riyadh, he took me off to see a Saudi friend of ours, and he pointed up to a sign. He said, "Tim, can you read that sign for me? We need to know which exit we're going." And I thought, I've been here 6 weeks, and he thinks I can read Arabic. I've been here 6 weeks. This guy could speak fluent Arabic, fluent Turkish, and fluent Russian. I mean,
Who is this?
Linguist. What is it? You're just born with this gift, and some people can do it. I have to admit that, in terms of language learning, I'm not a great language learner, but I suppose the language I know best is Indonesian from a previous marriage.
So is that where you ended up after you went to the Netherlands? Is that
After
where you
Europe,
went?
I ended up in the Far East. I ended up getting married out in Indonesia, and I learned Indonesian language in the family. Picked it up, So now I can talk about showers and shopping and stuff like that. But the interesting thing about it was that I got hired as a consultant for a British council project in which I had to use the Indonesian language to do my job.
Oh, wow.
Now that was a big challenge. I sort of managed it, even though the register, of course, it's totally different. When you're talking about work matters, interviewing high-level personnel within the university, it's a totally different way of speaking from the way you speak in the family. So you've got a tremendous gap in the level of difficulty.
And how?
Giving a presentation in Indonesian is not the easiest thing to do.
So you arrived in Indonesia, and what were you doing? Were you working for a language school or a university?
I worked at a place called the Indonesia-Australia Language Foundation when I first went there, and then eventually transferred to the British Council. There was no contract for me when I first arrived, which is par for the course in this field. So I ended up going to Singapore for a couple of months. This is 1995 now, by the way. Great place, Singapore. Again, there was no contract, but then I got a contract in Jakarta. So I went back to Indonesia, worked at the British Council English Language Centre in Jakarta for 2 years. I taught the very high level gifted Indonesian young students who were going to do master's degrees in the UK and in Australia. I taught them on the British Evening Awards programme for 2 years. I did IELTS, the speaking test, the writing, everything. I guess it's changed a lot over the years. I haven't done it since I was in Indonesia. But it was great because you could basically survive on different bits of work that you were able to get hold of. But then, I moved up into language projects. I went on the Asian Development Bank higher education project, and we moved to Sulawesi, which I think today is probably a little dangerous. They tend to have tsunamis and things like that.
So you were there in the 90s?
I went to Palu. This was 1997.
So that would have been quite a few years after the coup, right?
Yes, yeah. It was the time of the financial crash.
Okay.
That started in Thailand and then moved all the way around the Far East. So that period, that was a very, very intense period, lots going on, and it was because of that financial crash that I had to relocate to this area, to the Middle East.
So you went from Indonesia?
So from Indonesia, I then relocated and went to Kuwait, which is the position I took in Jabriya in the University of Kuwait for 3 years before I came here to Riyadh. My experience of this area is basically 4 countries. I haven't told you the very long story about Yemen. I don't think I will go into that now, but I did work in it for a year. The first country I worked in this area was Yemen, and I had to be evacuated after the Civil War, which was very James Bond,
Please do tell us. That would be great to hear about. So what happened?
Yes. What happened yes. Basically, what happened was that while I was working there in Sana'a, the capital at the British Council English Language Centre, a war started between the north of the country and the south. I went on leave to England, and when I came back, I was posted from Sana'a down to Hodeidah on the Red Sea coast. Okay, Hodeidah was fantastic. I really loved it down there. But while I was there with a group of colleagues, some of whom were managers, some of whom were teachers, the war broke out, and all of the roads basically were blocked. You couldn't travel by road, and we were stuck on the coast. And so, using the walkie-talkie radio and so on, the director told us, oh, by the way, we're leaving now, and all the expatriates and foreign nationals flew out of Sanaa, leaving us down, exposed to rockets. Scud missiles were landing and things like that. Eventually, a Scud missile landed in the grounds of the British Council in Sanaa, and I got a call one day, and the director said, Tim, I think it's time to go. And I said, I agree with you, sir. And anyway, the rumor was that the Americans were going to pick us up in a ship, but the ship turned out to be hundreds of miles further north, and we ended up being evacuated from the port of Hodeida on a freighter, a cargo ship, which contained cars, which the Danes offered to get us out. And so after a lot of drama involving an Australian leader of the pilot boat, there was a controversy about whether we could actually get out to this ship, which was waiting off the port of Hodeida in international waters.
So were you just waiting in on the beach, or waiting in a accommodation?
Oh, it was very James Bond. I mean, we got up at 6 o'clock in the morning with all our belongings and a rucksack. I carried a suitcase, and when we got to the port area, there was a sort of military-style inspection where the Aussie leader came around sort of nose to nose, and stared us out, and we're all kind of thinking, is he going to let us take our bags with us? And eventually he relented and allowed us to take our luggage, put it in a big skip, and it was taken out to the ship. And then we, after passport control and so on, we boarded the ship and had a wonderful sailing experience with porpoises and dolphins and sharks leaping up in the water on the way down to Africa. We landed in Djibouti, and really I shouldn't say too much about Djibouti, except to say if you ever do end up there, I think you'll find it's a very interesting place.
So I've never been to Djibouti.
Managed mainly by the French military, by the French Navy. We had a transit pass, and we had to basically catch a flight back to London on Air France via Paris. And that experience was, it's my only experience of Africa, to be true. I've spent 2 days in Africa, but they're probably two of the most memorable days of my life when I reflect. It was certainly expensive, very expensive. Pizza was £50 for two.
In Djibouti?
Yes. Goodness knows what it cost today. It was a very expensive place. Good thing we were only there 2 days, really. But my goodness, eventually I got back to London and connected with my manager from the British Council, who was, handling things for the British Council. And the next step was I ended up going out to Indonesia, and she followed suit. She went there as well. So that was helpful because it meant I was able eventually to connect with the British Council in Indonesia. But my goodness, it was, it's certainly, I think, if a movie of my life is, if anyone's interested, you want to put me in the movie, I'm up for it.
So after you left Yemen, went to Djibouti, where did you go next?
Back to London. I was finishing my master's degree at the time at Reading University, so I went to the postgraduate accommodation in Reading and eventually submitted my massive tome and then forgot about it for a few months and graduated at the end of that year, while I was already in Indonesia and married at the end of that year. So that was my first marriage, which ended in disaster, as often marriages do. But alhamdulillah, now I'm happy. Yes.
And so Indonesia, how long did you spend in Indonesia?
4 years. 4 years, yeah. In Jakarta and then in Sulawesi. I was there for 4 years. And then when I landed in the Middle East, the first country I worked in was Kuwait, and then I had a summer in Oman, working at HSBC at the bank down in Salalah, teaching the bank staff.
Oh wow, a number of our colleagues have worked in Salalah and they say it's one of the most beautiful places.
Oh, it's wonderful. Yeah. I highly recommend it. Salalah is really beautiful, and indeed Oman is fantastic. It was CFBT I worked for in Oman, but it was a summer job. But I was only there about 10 weeks, something like that.
So Yemen to Djibouti, back to the UK, did your masters, and then you came out to Oman?
I went out. Eventually, I ended up in Oman, and then I applied to work with British Aerospace.
Here in
Originally,
Riyadh?
I applied to work in Dhahran, but there were no places in Dhahran. They sent my application up to Riyadh, and I ended up spending 10 years at the King Faisal Air Academy in Riyadh.
Oh, so were you housed on Salwa compound?
I was housed on Salwa compound when we moved there, yes.
Now that is a fascinating place because it's just a very nice compound. It feels almost like you're back in the UK because they've got all sorts of stores from the UK and things like that.
Yeah.
So you did 10 years there?
No, I was only at Salwa for 5 years, and then I relocated. Well, I went out of the country for a while, and then relocated and came back, and I now work at PSU, and I've now completed 10 years at PSU, which is it's I enjoy what I'm doing. I think the work of helping young men develop themselves, even though it's incredibly challenging because it's cross-cultural, and their culture is very different to ours in terms of what you invest in developing yourself and so on. But I think it's a really worthy work, and you know that you've had some amazing experiences with these students, and you've travelled and filmed in the Asir and such places. It is an amazing experience, and we learn a lot from it, of course.
We certainly do, and I think the place that we work at now, we got pretty lucky because the students, they're friendly, they're pretty engaged, they're very polite and respectful. It's quite a nice environment to work in. Oh, what?
Darling,
Sorry.
come here, because I want to top the story with you. Come here.
Sorry.
Okay, this is the lady who has made me happy at the end of a very long story, and it's the right way, I think, to end this little vignette of my life. This is Thelma, who I met long years ago and eventually married, and she's made me very, very happy. So I think this is the right way to complete the story, because it wouldn't be complete at all without you in it.
We'll have our 4th anniversary this
That's right.
Sunday.
This weekend is our 4th anniversary.
Congratulations.
So, I'm delighted that you're joining the story.
Maybe are you guys going to go to Dubai for your
For
anniversary?
our anniversary.
Are we going to Dubai for the anniversary or later?
Maybe.
Next month. Next month we're going to Dubai.
So
And hopefully Turkey, if we're allowed to fly to Turkey in July.
because we got already a ticket.
We need to see Istanbul. Absolutely, we do. Like everyone else on the planet, we definitely need to see Istanbul. So,
One.
are you ready for that?
Oh, always ready.
You're always ready. Okay.
Thank you very much for that, Tim. It's certainly a fascinating life, and
Yes.
hopefully we can catch up another time on the channel.
That would be great. Thanks, James.